Welcome to week 2. Blessings to all. I hope that you were able to get acclimated with this class. Through week 1, you had to do your introduction and some reading and your first discussion. I know there was a little bit of confusion with the discussion. I have contacted the IT for support to make sure that all of your discussion boards are set up appropriately. So to dive right into your agenda for week 2, you should be reading chapter 2 of your textbook, Values and Ethics in Social Work. And it talks a lot about ethics and has a lot of really good information. I know quite a few of you are working in the field, so this information is very familiar to you. However, for those of you that are not currently working in the field, it's really good information in truly understanding um, the aspects of ethics. So, from the code of ethics and what that represents for your organization or for any type of entities that you may be involved with, and the importance of confidentiality and keeping the customer's information confidential, keeping records confidential, the ethical perspectives behind how you go about managing your workloads, your cases, asking for information, in your decision making. All of those aspects are covered. Really good information on page 30 in relation to the ethical principles hierarchy. And it talks about from the top level of um, protection of life, so they're going to protect themselves, seeking equality and inequality, autonomy and freedom, least amount of harm, quality of life, privacy and confidentiality, truthfulness, and full disclosure. So, a really good perspective when you start thinking about looking at theoretical frameworks that are associated to social work and aspects of social work. Ethics is a really, really good topic and probably many case studies to refer to. And so, if that is of your interest in relation to your capstone project, this is a good point of reference. So, other than your weekly reading, you have your PowerPoint that really breaks down the chapters, and then you have 2 discussion boards. You should be listening to this lecture or watching this lecture, however you choose. And you do have a quiz on chapters 1 and 2. So as I introduced you to last week, I reminded you to make sure that you were reading your chapters because you did have a few quizzes in this course. So I want to make sure that you're giving your attention to that. For discussion board number 1 for week 2, you are being asked to, for each of the ethical dilemmas outlined in box 2.10, consider whether you would consult with colleagues. If so, what questions would you ask? So I'm going to refer you back to chapter 2, and on page 33 of chapter 2. It's box 2.10, Ethical Dilemmas Case Examples. You're going to review case number 1, 2, and 3. For each of the dilemmas, consider whether you would consult with colleagues. If so, what questions would you ask? So just really kind of getting you in that thought process, or for those of you that are already working in the field, what questions do you ask? Are those things that are common to you in each of these cases? Do you come across these experiences? So it allows you an opportunity to use some real case examples for your point of reference. For discussion board number 2 for week 2, what aspects of modern society make it challenging to adopt the long-term perspective called for in the ethic of care framework. So going back to your textbook as your point of reference, you're going to really want to make sure that you read the entire chapter, but really hone in on page 28 as well. So using your experience, using your insight, as well as your resources, which is your textbook. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you in regards to what aspects of modern society make it challenging to adopt the long-term perspectives called for in the ethics of care framework. Remember, you have to interact with at least 2 classmates and post 50 words minimum each, and really looking for engagement. At this point, I know you guys, as I said, you're either juniors or seniors, so you're getting wore out, but I need you to really push forward and persevere, because this is when you really start having an opportunity to apply all that you've learned and link it to the theories and the research that you are doing, and using your peers to bounce ideas and ask questions and gain further insight. So I encourage you to continue to interact with each other and really, really take heed to these opportunities for the discussion. As I said, it's your first quiz, so contains multiple choice, covers materials from the textbook, so you can open and close it, but schedule time to be able to commit to it to get it done. We'll see how you do, and then we'll determine how we go about allowing retakes. But I want to see how you do out the gate, because I want to make sure you're doing your readings. So just quickly referencing back to the PowerPoint for this week, I'm going to start, it looks like started on slide. It's values and ethics and social work. It goes social work. It goes in relation with the chapters. Speaking of ethics, are in relation to moral principles that guide a person's behavior and the effects that they have on others, the behaviors, what is considered unethical by definition in relation to how our, our behaviors exist to foster and preserve our clients' welfare. And then is it in our favor, or is it in the favor of what is in the best interest of those that we are serving? There's so many areas of uncertainty, and so how do we seek guidance in those instances to make sure that we are making the best possible decision? You'll find, especially in children and family services, aging and adult services, they have very specific ways about making decisions. So it's decision making framework in the sense of what they follow in certain circumstances, in those unique and unusual circumstances, to make sure that their decisions are being based on the most appropriate, seeking the best solutions and safest outcomes for the families. So when we talk about case management, there's no one set way. It's not, this is all we need to know, and this is how it will always turn out. You are always assessing, and that responsibility occurs at all points in the process of your interactions. So how you facilitate, coordinate, collaborate, and really work with that client to make sure that they are working towards their goals and they are working towards meeting those goals successfully. And then when they do not, what are you doing to get them back on track? Sometimes there's areas or situations where policy may say one way, your supervisor or manager or director may tell you a different way, and it may not be aligned with or clearly aligned with what's the most ethical way to approach it. And so really thinking about how you in that circumstance would deal with that, and how would you have those crucial conversations to address those concerns that you may have with something that may not be quite clear if it's right or wrong, and you having concerns about making the decision on which direction to go. And so as you can see, this continues in the concept of really breaking down when you talk about case management and case managers, making the most ethical decisions aligned with the appropriate code of ethics, standards, scope of practice, and complying with them. And so it just continues to go through and really break down each of those components. The standards of practice, I suggest you give this your attention. Very good information, very applicable to what we're studying. The areas of conflict, stewardship, those responsibilities, being fiscally responsible of resources, case the case management process and how that is carried out through the making sure that you go through all steps that are needed from case manager, scope of practice, using critical thinking and evidence-based knowledge. This is a wonderful quote. The ethics of excellence are grounded in the action, what you actually do, rather than what you say. You believe, talk, as the saying goes, is cheap. Written by Price Pritchett. 5 basic ethical principles. So the beneficence, non-malfeasance, autonomy, justice, fidelity. Within your chapter, you are able to read more about each of these in relation to what they each represent, and it gives you more of clarity in relation to how that applies to ethics and principles to be followed in ethics. So when you talk about your discussion questions, um, really applying those principles and what those principles represent. So I don't believe that the chapter actually breaks down each and every one. So I'm going to talk through each one really quickly just to help kind of guide you and help you to link it to the information that you are reading in the chapter. So when we talk about ethical principles and really how we approach leading in human services, or even working within human services, and as a social worker, or as any type of specialist or coordinator, or those that service the public, really thinking about what each of those principles define and what that represents. So when we talk about the beneficence, I always struggle with beneficence. It's the charity, the mercy, kindness, doing good to others, having a moral obligation to always do what is right. So when you serve, following policies, regulations, making sure you're meeting your customers' needs, your clients' needs. So really, really having that moral feeling and desire to always want to do right. Then when we speak to the non malfeasance, means the inflicting the least amount of harm possible for the most beneficial outcome. So what are we doing to make sure that in the decisions, in the directions and the goals, that it's the least amount of harm with the most beneficial outcome to those that it may impact or those that we serve. When you speak of autonomy and that ethical principle, it's more about that self-governance and to act in accordance with one's own influence and rather than the influence of others or feedback or input from others. So based on very tunnel and one-sided perspective is autonomy. From the justice perspective, it's really wanting to make sure that people receive what they deserve, and that deserving is it's broad, but eye for an eye, and really making sure that those are held accountable for their behavior and are judged basically, or held towards a judge in order to be held accountable for that. And so this can be a tough one from an ethical perspective because really working with those that are in need, oftentimes there's circumstances or situations that have caused them to be in those where they are at that moment in time. And so when you are really approaching practices and decisions based on justice, one could be held accountable much more than what they may much more than what should be, in the sense of other ways of getting to the root to help develop or make the change where that change is trying to happen. And so, for example, probation and a client and a parent having to work with children and family services, having to work with probation department, and the probation officer inquires about something, and instead of asking the client about it to get their perspective first, coming to a conclusion and really placing the utmost degree of reprimand or holding them accountable in a way that may be much more harsh than needed. So we have to be careful about that justice from that ethical principle perspective. For some reason my voice is going out on me. And then from the fidelity perspective, it's that loyalty, support, and always wanting to make sure, having faith in the people that they serve and work with for the cause of what they're trying to accomplish, and making sure that it's conducive to really supporting in a way that is always loyal and and working with them to do what's needed to get them to where they need to be. So that is the quick overview of 5 basic ethical principles from a perspective of working within human services and really looking at it from a social work perspective. So not going to go too much further. I know you have about 9 or 10 more slides giving you much more details. As I said before, standards, codes, ethics, all those are very applicable to this chapter, to this topic. So I encourage you to continue through and just look at the examples that are provided. Love this as a point of reference as far as making sure that you kind of check in to see where you're at in relation to making decisions that are ethical in those that you are working with and interacting with on a regular basis. and then just closing out with some really good quotes as well. So that pretty much covers the majority of your week 2. Um, you know how to reach me. Email me if you need me. I will look to respond as quick as possible. I believe I have the outage situations worked out, but we shall see, and I shall see if I hear from you this week. So wish you all the best this week. Sorry that was a little choppy. For some reason, my voice is pretty scratchy this week. Not sure why, but hope all is well. Hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.